If you find the chat box distracting, some people do, some people don't. If it bothers you, a lot of people like it because they like to ask questions. But if you don't, then there are a couple ways to hide it. You can click that little chat box right here, that green one, or the one there that's surrounded in green at the bottom of your screen. That'll hide it or bring it back up. Or you can do the shortcut and hit Alt-H at the same time, and that'll close it or open it. I just wanted to make that, give you that hint because it can be awkward if you don't like it. So what we're going to talk today about is the number one cause of most plant problems. I've been working in our plant and insect clinic as a volunteer for 10 years, almost 10 years. No, it's been 10 years now. And we see insects, we see plant disease, but we rarely see those on healthy plants. We can sometimes, but most of the time it's they're not healthy or they're planted in the wrong place to begin with. And we're going to talk today about some mistakes people make and what you can do, things you should look for so you'll know how to plant them and how to choose them for that matter. So here's what we're going to talk about. Why it's important to choose the right plant for the right place, how to do it, how to plant. Now, this is biggie. You know, I don't know about you, but I always thought you just kind of plopped it out of your the container it was in and dig a hole and stick it in there. Not so. There's a lot more to it if you want your plant to be really healthy. And how to maintain them, how to keep them that way, how to keep them healthy. Now, I haven't done this before, so let's try this. So here are some problems. These folks planted this dogwood tree out in the middle of their yard. And I always thought dogwood trees were full sun, but they don't like that out here. Maybe they do in some places, but out here in the Pacific Northwest, they don't like full sun. I almost always see people coming in around July and they say, what is wrong with my dogwood? The leaves have all crinkled up, they've turned red, and they look crispy. And that's because of the full sun. They do a lot better in dappled sunlight. And here's hostas. They're also a shade-loving plant, and they got fried. And I'll bet you've all seen this. I'll bet you this was a gorgeous little planting bed when they first planted it, and now look at it. It's completely overgrown. Oops. They kind of forgot to think that this might grow big enough to incorporate the fence into it. This was an interesting case. A fellow, this came in, I think, in spring. Art handled this one. But this fellow had planted these arborvitae between the two houses because their windows looked right into each other and they wanted privacy and not have to close the blinds. So he planted the arborvitae. They look good right there, don't they? And they look good when you look at the back of the house toward the front. But all the branches inside are dying, and he couldn't figure out why. And I'll bet a lot of you can figure this out. There was no light getting to those branches. None whatsoever once they got to that height. So the tops are fine. He was watering it, but all this foliage died, and all they were looking at out their window was each other through the dead branches. So just a real quick brush up. All plants need good circulation, air. They need light, and everyone's different. Some like full sun, some like part sun, but they all like well-drained soil. Not too well-drained because then the moisture just goes right through and it dries out too quickly. And they do have different water requirements. Some plants have like wet feet, others cannot tolerate wet feet. And they've got to have space, and that's something that a lot of us just don't take into consideration. Not only do you have to look down because the roots are spreading out laterally, you have to look up and see what's in the way, maybe in the way, and all around. Are you going to crowd something else out? Are you going to block your window? So there are a lot of different considerations. So we're going to look at the height, the spread, Is it deciduous or evergreen? Because that'll make a difference in how you plan as well. Is it the different shapes and forms that will give you more what you're looking for? For example, a columnar type arborvitae instead of a big bushy plant. How fast does it grow? Do you have the exposure, the sun, soil, and water for it? And is the hardiness zone correct? You would think that when you go to one of the nurseries around here, that they would only be selling plants that would do well in our hardiness zone. But that's kind of iffy, and I'll give you some examples later. But take a look at this. This is from Trees Are Good, which is the ISA, the International Society of Arborists site for homeowners. They are the end-all in, they're the go-to site. They're the ones that know what they're talking about when it goes to trees. This is what they suggest. You put the tall trees way in back of your house. Be careful when you're putting them near the house, the medium-sized zones, you know, and then you keep the lower ones underneath the electrical telephone wires, if you still have those. And make sure that you are planting one of the trees that fits that space. You want to know what the tree is going to look like at maturity, not that cute little tree that you just planted plop out there 4 feet from your front window. So you want to get an idea of that as well. And again, there are different shapes, and they make a difference on what you want them to do in your space. And how close should you plant them? And the small trees, the 30 feet or less, 6 to 15 feet. Medium trees, 30 to 40 feet. Large trees, 70 feet or more. And I think my husband has his headphones on, so I'm going to tell you something. He can't hear me. We live on a fairly busy street that's going up a mountain, and we wanted privacy. We built our home a couple of years ago. And he said, well, the Leland cypress grow fast, and they're just beautiful. And they are. And when he planted them, they were all about 4 feet tall, and that was 2017, so it's been 4 years. And he planted them in a zigzag fashion, and they are 4 feet apart. And so far they're doing well, but they're not going to. Really, in fact, the trees that are down the hill and are competing with the soil or with the moisture and the nutrients in the soil closer to the big Doug fir we have down there, they're dying. And I think if he doesn't remove some of those trees, that's going to happen with them too. But he says, you know, you master gardeners think you know what you're talking about. Well, you know, if we don't know, we know where to find the answer. So anyway, let's move on. So you want to match the right tree or shrub to the right place, and that is probably the most important thing when you're making a choice. Some of the common problems I've seen, that if it's not growing in the preferred cultural conditions, it becomes stressed, and then it's prone to insect damage and plant disease. A couple of years ago, when we built the house, my husband had his heart set on a weeping Alaskan cedar tree. They're beautiful. He knew exactly where he wanted it. He wanted it tucked in a little corner on the north side of our house, partly in the shade of a nearby tree. At the nursery, he looked at the plant label, because I asked him to, and it said it needed full sun, well-drained, moist soil, and it can grow to 50 feet and has a 20-foot spread. He insisted that it'd be fine. And fast forward 4 years now, that cute little Alaskan cedar is 25 feet tall, and it's still growing, and every year it looks like it's going to die because the leaves die off. It doesn't like the soil or the moisture in the soil or the lack thereof. It's had spider mites and needle blights, and it's brushing up against the house, and this year probably, it's going to take out the gutters. And I didn't even say I told you so, because I'm a good person. Okay, so how much light does this plant need that you'll have? What kind of soil drainage? And we're going to talk about how to do a perk test to check that. Is it susceptible to flooding? Can the plant live in your personal hardiness zone or your personal microclimate? And is it pest resistant? Do you have a reason that you need it to be pest resistant, like visiting deer? Now, here's some examples. I'll bet you have all seen this. When we first moved out here from Ohio, I said, you know, that is the funniest thing I've ever seen. I have never seen anybody prune these to shape like this. And we asked somebody about it, and they said, oh, that's the deer. I didn't know that. But yeah, you see this, and that's deer. They love arborvitae. We planted them all along our fence, and we go to Florida. We did go to Florida every year. And the first year we went, we had trees that were arborvitae that were about 10 feet tall, and we came back, and they looked like this, and my husband was just devastated. So now when we went after he replanted them, I was using a pretty good deer repellent. And I would say that this yard has really poor drainage, and those trees are going to die because too much water is just as bad as not enough, because the plant will drown. It needs oxygen, and there's no oxygen in that water. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Yes, I did. Okay. Look at the plant tag. And this is just one of the plant tags. If you go to a good nursery, they'll have their own plant tag on it too. We've gone to a Portland nursery down on Stark, I think it is, or Powell, and they told us, they said, you can look at the one that comes from the people that grow the tree, and then you should look at ours because we tell the truth. So, the other thing is, I don't know if I put this somewhere else, take your phone with you because you'll be able to access information. You can take pictures. I'll give you a couple websites that you can look up the tree before you buy it to make sure it actually fits where you want it to. But first of all, let's check the sun. Full sun means a minimum of 6 hours, and light shade means 3 to 5 hours of direct sun. And when they talk about 3 to 5 hours light shade, a lot of times they're talking morning sun, the east sun. It's not nearly as hot as it gets in the afternoon. And partial shade is 2 hours of direct sun or shaded for half the day. And full shade, you know what that is. And then dense shade is when you plant something underneath your front porch and there's no light. So if you're wondering when they give you a combination of part shade to full sun, the first word describes the light requirements that it would prefer, and the second one means that basically that it'll tolerate some full shade. So a perk test, I think, yeah. First I want to show you this. This is out in Longview off of Ocean Beach. One of the sloughs runs behind these homes. We got called to somebody's house about 4 years ago, and they had some beautiful specimen trees. They must have had thousands and thousands of dollars of these trees. They were beautiful. And they had called us, and they're telling us this, and they said they're all dying. I don't know what they have. So we decided we'd make a site visit, and we went out there, and these homes all have curbs, and the curbs all have drains. And when we pulled up in front of that house, water was gushing onto coming out 4 feet from those drains. And we looked at their yard, we walked across it, and it was like walking through a wet sponge. The only trees on their property that were doing well were those that were planted on a mound. They had gotten, mounded up soil probably 4 feet, and those plants were doing great. So if you don't have well-drained soil, you can do things to amend the soil, but one of the quickest ways you can do it, and it can be lovely in a landscape, is make a raised bed and plant the trees in that. So here's how you do a soil drainage test, a perk test. Basically what it is, you dig a hole, you fill it with water, you let it drain, and then you fill it with water again, and you see how long it takes to drain. And if a soil drains around 2 inches an hour, then that's pretty good for most plants. If it's less than an inch an hour, the drainage is too slow, and you're going to have to amend the soil with either amend the soil with good organic amendments, or put plants in there that tolerate wet soil. If the drainage is more than 4 inches per hour, then it's draining too fast and the soil will dry out too quickly. So you'll want to plant something that tolerates drought. Quit advancing. Here we go. Okay. Okay. Pest and disease resistance. I have always wanted a rose up here where I live on Green Mountain Road, and I've been advised that the only way I should do it is to plant them in a pot on my deck and make sure that the deck is locked, because we have lots of deer who come up and eat my plants now, but if there were roses, it would probably be even worse. This is a deer in my front yard at my other house, and they are eating a deer-resistant ground cover, sedum. And I wish I'd gotten the picture right after this, because I made a noise and the deer looked up and she had a beard because she had a mouthful of my sedum. So again, deer-resistant plants, it doesn't mean that they're deer-proof. If a deer's hungry enough, it'll eat anything. And here's the list. And I put over in the chat, and I'll do it after the talk too, all these resources will be available on our website, so you don't have to worry about getting this. But there are a lot of deer-resistant shrubs out there, but just keep in mind that it means they're resistant and not deer-proof, or you're going to be very disappointed. Now, take your phone with you to the nursery when you're looking for things, because you can go to both of these sites. This one's PNW Plants, and it can help you. This is probably better for helping you find plants, but you can put in a name, like if, let's maple. And it'll give you a bunch of different choices, and on each one of these choices, it will tell you the requirements, the plant characteristics, how tall it gets, does it have showy fruit, it'll tell you all of this stuff. The other place is Missouri Botanical, and I really like them because they give you a lot more information. So if we put maple here, well, let's hydrangea. It's going to take its time. I'm not going to wait here if it takes too long. Here we go. So it gives a lot of different kind of hydrangeas too, but look what this gives you. This gives you the height, the spread, the zone. PNW Plants is going to give you the zone because it figures you're from Washington. It tells you the maintenance, the water, how much water it needs, full shade, part shade. It's tolerant to drought and heavy shade, and it gives you all kinds of information. So if you take your phone with you and you have these links on your phone, maybe in your email or send a chat to yourself, you'll be able to check each plant as you're looking at it to see if it will actually suit where you want it to go. Yeah, that's what she was eating. And she brought her babies with her too, and they were eating it too. So she taught them, and I'm sure they'll be back. So we have microclimates here. And I mean, we all know that. I was just talking to somebody from Walla Walla, and she's at 2,200 feet. I'm at 1,000 feet. Some of you are at pretty much, 10 feet. Others are at 500 feet. Elevation definitely matters. And the other thing that matters, where I live, I'm kind of like facing the Oregon coastal range. And so the sun sets for us probably an hour before the sun goes down into the ocean because of the shadow of the range, which cuts down on my availability of light. You can also have areas in your yard where it's very cold. If you look out in your yard and you see one place that consistently gets frost where nothing else does, you want to be very careful what you plant there. Just do your homework first. So I'm going to give you some really great examples. I'll bet you've seen that. And you know what? That's actually properly pruned. This is called directional pruning, and people, the companies, the utility companies used to go and just top the trees, chop them off at the top. And that's not healthy for a plant. So they do a different kind of pruning method called directional pruning, and I'll show you a couple other examples. I've done that. And I'll bet you've seen all of these. That's called a V shape. And then this is, they cut just the side. Now it looks ugly, but it saves the tree. What you really need to do is do your homework first and not plant one of those big trees underneath the power lines. Planting a tree too close to the walk, it can be, the roots will disrupt the sidewalk or your patio or your driveway. Soil compaction, which was something that I guess I hadn't really considered before I became a master gardener. If you have a party over your house and you let people park on your lawn, do you ever see what your grass looks like afterwards? It takes a long time for that to recover. But that's not the only thing it does. When it compacts like that, it pushes all the soil together and moves out all the oxygen. So it's very difficult for oxygen to get to any roots. So if you try to plant there later, it makes it more difficult. And do you know how, here, I think it's this one. Yeah, that's a pathway. People took a shortcut through that yard all the time, or the dog, I'm not sure what. But it's the same type of thing. That's soil compaction, and you end up with a path. That grass won't grow, or it won't grow well there. Here's some other problems. Hot spots on the west or south sides of the house. I just had somebody send me a question. He had a bunch of arborvitae. They were beautiful on one side faced south and west, and there were a bunch of rocks as a retaining wall just on the other side of them. But on the other side, it was their yard, and that faced obviously east and north, and it was lush and beautiful. But the south side was an absolute disaster. It was just too rough on the plant, and it couldn't keep up with the sun. That's unusual with conifers, but it happened here. So this is somebody's backyard from last year when we had that real hot spell. And he said, I don't know what happened. My roses all wilted. They were terrible. And I thought they all died. But he said, but the other plants in the backyard were just fine. And I asked him if they got the afternoon sun. He said, yeah, man, it's really hot in that part. And I said, they'll be okay. But they will wilt because the leaves can't keep up with the loss of water. And sure enough, that night after it cooled down, it perked up again. But you may want to check out your yard or your space before you try to plant something. Know your space. And we're all dealing with slopes here. A lot of us are anyway. And we are trying to find good ground cover that works so that we don't have to worry about mowing it. And I have a whole lot of sites that you can go check for really good ground cover choices. They grow fast and you don't have to mow. This was a mistake. These trees are planted right next to a driveway or to a sidewalk, and the reflected heat up off the driveway or sidewalk, whichever it is sunburning the leaves. It's something that you never really consider when you plant them there. And the same thing happened here. The bottom leaves, they look pretty good. Not great, but pretty good. But they're against a building on the west and south sides of the building, and the sun is reflecting off here and onto the plants, and they're in a little oven there. And you can also have a problem if you've got a plant that you want to plant under the eaves. It makes it really tough because they really aren't getting the water that they should be getting. Even though it's raining all the time, they're still not getting the water that they need. This was also from a master gardener friend of ours. She said that her neighbor was trying to be neighborly. This is his fence and his shed, And it was hitting his head when he was walking in his yard, so he decided to help her out and trim her tree. She was devastated. Again, this wouldn't have happened if she'd planted 6 feet out from the fence. Don't plant messy trees unless you're willing to pick them up. This is a magnolia. If anybody has magnolias in their yard, they know what I'm talking about. That's a slippery mess while they're after they're done flowering. I love looking at them in other people's yards, though. I just love it. So I will continue to enjoy their yards and not bring it into mine. I haven't seen this much out here, but back east, everybody had a crabapple tree right next to the right next to the sidewalk, and they were also just absolutely beautiful in the spring. And the birds just love the berries in the winter, and they look so pretty on the trees after the leaves are gone, and all you have is these red berries. But they are just awful. They attract yellow jackets and ants. If the berries are still hard, you can slip on them, or when they're decomposing, you can slide on them. So, take care, do your homework, see what kind of a mess they may or may not make. Make sure to consider the mature size of your tree, the height, the width, the planting distance apart, and measure carefully and draw pictures. Draw pictures to size if possible. Get even spray paint out there and spray paint the area on your mulch, because you can always turn that over, and kind of mark out where the mature plant will be, and then look up. Is it going to hit something? Is it going to cover a window? And don't leave the plant tag. That's the problem. I don't know why they put that on the plant tags, because I have never seen one that actually is reliable. If you're taking really good care of your plant, chances are it's going to grow bigger than that plant tag says. Portland Nursery says you can believe our plant tags, and if you look at the difference between what their plant tag says and where they got the plant from says, you can tell it's different. One plant, the tag on the plant will say grows to 25 feet, and Portland Nursery says it grows to 40 feet. So be aware, do your homework. Some common plants. Planting too much. Those look really cute right now. And I've seen this in a lot of different places. You want your house, if you're doing new landscaping, you want it to look complete. You want it to look pretty. So you plant the plants really close together. And in a couple years, they're all filling in and it looks like you've got a jungle. Planting a monoculture, that's what this is called. Planting all the same kind of tree in one place can be bad, because if one goes bad, you no longer have that shield up there that you wanted, the border between your neighbors and your house. So you're probably better off maybe putting a couple arborvitae and then something else in here, and maybe a couple more arborvitae. That way you have a little bit more flexibility. And try not to plant plants like roses out in the middle of your yard, because that's a magnet for deer. And this is a azalea. I don't know if if any of you have azaleas, but we have had a heck of a problem over here with azalea lacebug. And chances are you're not even going to see the lacebug. What you're going to see is foliage that looks like this. It turns kind of silvery on top, and if you turn the leaf over, there's all these black spots. And if you get out a magnifying glass, probably in May, you'll see all the lace bugs there. They're very tiny, and they are so ugly. Actually, the bugs are beautiful, but what they do to your plant is ugly. And it's very, very hard to treat for them. You can put a systemic in the soil that the plant will take up, but then you're poisoning the blossoms, which will kill the bees. So you don't want to do that. I know some people who've had azaleas with this problem and have taken the azaleas out and put something else in because of that. There are some bully trees out there too. Things like butterfly bush that there's only certain sterile varieties that they allow in Washington now. Some of the nandinas, which are the heavenly bamboos, they can just spread like wildfire, and they can take over your entire planting bed. Non-clumping bamboo If you're going to buy bamboo, make sure it's the clumping type because that other bamboo will just take over. So you don't want to plant bully plants. And you want to make sure that the plant, again, is in the right place. It's not in the right spot. This is a rhododendron, and I'll bet you a lot of you have seen this on your rhododendrons. These are new leaves. You go through a really, really hot spell in May or April, because we almost always have a week like that, and they got sunburned, and that won't go away. The new growth will be fine, but meanwhile, it doesn't look so hot. And most rhododendrons really don't like full sun anyway, so read the label, do your homework. This is a Hebe, and this is boxwood. Boxwoods are very hardy. They've got some problems of their own, but they're very hardy. I think they're good down to zone 4, which is like, what, minus 20 degrees? Hebe, on the other hand, when we first moved here from Ohio, I saw Hebes in somebody's yard, and I fell in love with them. They are just gorgeous. So I was up at 1,500 feet then, and I bought myself some Hebes, and they said, "Don't do it. It might say zone 8, but I don't believe it." And I said, "Oh, I think it'll be fine." And sure enough, the first winter they did fine because it was a mild winter. Second year, I lost every single one of them because it got too cold for them, and they all died. Now, we're going to talk about, you've done your homework, you know what you want. Now, how do you pick the best possible specimen? And this is something that I never considered. If it had a pretty flower on it and was the kind of plant I want, I just kind of stood back and looked at it. If it looked good, I bought it. And then when I took it out of the pot, I dug a hole and I stuck it in the ground. And I wonder why some of mine didn't work. So what you want to see is the branches are evenly spaced around the trunk. So if you were to stand on top of this tree and look at it, you would see the branches would be out like the spokes of a wheel. You want to make sure that there's a strong, firm attachment to the tree. Sometimes you get branches that are, let's see, like this. That's too acute an angle, and that space between that V where they meet will sometimes, the bark, it joins together and it makes for a very weak attachment, and it will split. It may take years for it to do that, but it'll split. And of course, you want to check and make sure that there's no wounds or damage to the trunk. I'll bet you, I'd be willing to bet that when I was looking at the shrubs I bought, I never really looked hard at the trunk. I was looking at the bush, and make sure that it has a good root system that's appropriate for the size of the bush that you're seeing above the ground. You should also see this trunk flare. Do you see how it comes down and it kind of flares out like that? If you don't see that, it's buried too high. It's got soil around it. It's up too high. And if you have a choice, don't buy that plant. There are ways to fix that, but if you have a choice, don't buy that plant. Okay. So this is an example of a bad tree. I mean, look at all those branches. They're rubbing. This one has one of those real tight splits that I was telling you about. The leaves are wilting. You see this here? These are roots coming out of the root ball here, and they're wrapping around the trunk. And you're going to end up, I don't know if you've ever heard of the term girdling, a tree being girdled. There's a variety of ways that can happen, but one of them is with roots. The roots will grow around the tree and will choke off the tree's water and nutrient supply. Another thing that will girdle a tree is a weed eater coming whipping around the tree, and it'll just eat right through that layer where all the nutrients and water flow. Bad branch structure. I mean, you could tell just by looking at it that it's not good. There's a broken branch and there's a tree wound. That is not a good choice. And here's just another example. This is poor quality. It has everything we weren't talking about. You don't want a whole bunch of branches coming out unless it's supposed to be a multi-branched plant, and then check out low on the bush or the tree to make sure that there's no weak structures there. This isn't straight. This one's already bent. It's got two stems here that one of them is going to become dominant or not, and it'll split. Same thing here. Same thing here. The good quality tree has a little bit better branching structure, and this is the best quality. And if you looked at the top down, you would see it going out like spokes of a wheel. This is an example of the kind of tree I was telling you about. A good storm would come by, and that would just split down. Chances are it'd go on that house, too, because you know Murphy's Law says it won't go the other way. So let's see. Oh, I guess I didn't have any more like that. How to buy a healthy plant with good roots. I'm sure you've all pulled a plant out of a pot like this, and you have no clue what to do with it. This is circling roots. That is bad. Those plants are probably going to, if you just plop them into the ground, they're going to continue to grow that way because they don't know any better to go out into the soil. They're already going that way. But there's something you can do about it. However, if you're in a nursery, you can usually, if you tip the plant and have somebody help you, you can probably take the root ball out if it's not too big a tree and just take a quick look at it. If it's got this, don't get it. I mean, you can fix this, mind you. You can fix this. But, if you have the choice and you see something else similar and it doesn't look like this, get that. The roots, there should be a lot of roots. The roots that are the little fine ones should be kind of off-white. They shouldn't be dark brown because that means that they're rotting. Again, watch for those circling roots. And grafted trees. We'll look at that too. You don't want any root suckers to come out of that. And you want a nice solid root ball. If you can shake the tree and it's moving inside the pot without the pot moving, then it doesn't have enough roots there to support the top of the tree, and don't get that one. So here's some circling roots coming around here. Right now, they don't look so bad, but give it a couple years. They'll wrap around the trunk of that tree and kill it. And this is what I'm talking about. When those keep growing like that, that's going to cut the circulation to the tree off, and it will eventually kill it. And here's a sucker coming out from the rootstock. This is where it's grafted. You don't want that. And again, that's fixable as well. But this is what happens when you don't pay attention to that and you let the rootstock go. The rootstock was chosen because of the root's qualities. And they graft the pretty tree on top because that's what you want to look at. But if you don't take care of those root suckers, this is what you're going to end up with, and you'll probably end up with the desirable tree dying. Or at least it doesn't look real good for sure. So there are three different kinds of the way they store plants: the balled and burlapped, the containerized, which I think I'm more used to, and bare root, which we see more in the spring, usually for things like fruit trees. And make sure that when you buy the tree, move the tree around, you move it by the container, even if you have to use a dolly or put it in a wheelbarrow. Don't pull by the trunk. And the first thing you want to do is remove all the tags and all the wires, all the trunk wraps, because they don't belong on your plant. And if you forget about them, in fact, I found one on one of the trees that I put in a couple of years ago that I forgot to take out, and I took it off today. Luckily, I caught it in time, because it can, like that fence we saw back there where the tree grew around it, that can happen with this too. And again, you want to be able to see the trunk flare. The top of the root ball should be flat because rounding can indicate major wooding root loss. The diameter of the root ball for a balled and burlap bag should be at least 10 to 12 times the diameter of the trunk, and at about 6 inches above the root flare. So you want to remove that burlap and the wire basket and examine and correct the roots before you put it in the ground. And this is daunting because what we're supposed to do is really scary, because you're going to be cutting off roots if you weren't able to get the perfect plant. And you're going to want to do this in the shade, and we'll talk about that, but you're going to want to do it in the shade with a large container of water, and you're going to keep the roots in that water while you're working on, when you're not working on it, is to keep them nice and moist. So you're going to be pruning or straightening out the bad roots. The circling roots are the ones that are angling down, and I'll give you an example of that. The problem with balled and burlap bags, or trees, is when they take them, they're usually grown in a field, not in a container. And when they get them out of the ground, they yank out a lot of their root system, a lot of the little feeder roots. And when you plant them, they're going to go into transplant shock. In fact, most trees will a little bit go into shock because it takes a while for them to get the roots out into the soil, which is why you want to transplant them in the dormant season. Right now, most trees and shrubs don't have their leaves yet, but you're kind of pushing the cusp right here. The very best time to plant nearly every single plant is in the fall. That way they have all winter long to, establish their roots. So let's go on to some examples. The first thing you want to do, and I did this a couple years ago for the first time, and it really terrified me. You want to find where those big roots we saw, you want to find where those are. Chances are, most containers, they put too much soil in. They've got it piled up way higher than it should be. Most of the time, you can't see the trunk flare. Now, what they're doing here is gently poking a screwdriver or something like that down in until you feel the first big root. And then pull your screwdriver out, and it's probably about 2 inches down there, and poke around a couple other places because you want to make sure that you've got the topmost one. Once you have found, say there's one at 2 inches, and then you poke it down and the other one's about an inch below the surface, inch and a half below the surface, you're going to cut away around the top of that. You're going to cut that away so that you'll be able to get to those roots. Another thing that you can do, we had a talk by Linda Chalker Scott, who's one of WSU's garden professors, and she is a firm believer in bare root planting for everything. She soaks everything in water and gets all the roots off so that she can see all the roots. She does her fixing of the roots, and then she plants them. Whoops. And you would think that with as much root as she takes off that they wouldn't do well, but she has done experiments where she's done just the normal planting, ones without the damaged roots removed, and then the bare root that she's fixed, and the bare root that she has fixed the damaged roots do better. And many transplants fail because they are poor quality roots and because of what people do to the soil when they plant them, or because the soil quality isn't good. One of the big deals is that they install them too deeply. If you just plunk that container plant as is from the previous slide into the ground, it would be planting it too deeply right there. Almost every single container plant is planted too deeply in the pot, and you've got to prepare the roots. So what you want to do is remove the tree from the burlap and wire basket. They usually have burlap, and then inside is a wire basket. Take the wire basket off. The old information used to say, be really, really careful. You don't want to disturb the root ball, with those balled and burlap bags, because it's not good for them. That's not the case. What you want to get rid of is circling roots. You can't force the large roots to dive deep because it prevents outward growth. You can unwind some of the circling roots. A lot of them you can't. If they're small enough, you can. This hydrangea here, the best thing to do with that, if you're not going to plant it bare root by soaking it, is just to get a saw or a sharp knife and chop. Yeah, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. I wonder if I can go back. Back. Nope, I can't go back. Hang on, I am lost. shoot, I lost all my pictures. Anyhow, what you would do is cut around, and you take 2 inches off of every single side. Okay. So this is what she did. This is an example she gave us. Take a look at this. So you've got some roots here. These are elbowed down. You can see some coming out here, and they would probably want to go around. I'm not sure. This one isn't so good. So what she chopped off, and this is all that's left, she chopped this one off, which is this one. No, she chopped this one off, which is this one. She chopped both of these off, and this one too. And there may be some on the back that we're not seeing. And this is all that's left. And then she planted it. Now, she planted it correctly. And this is what they're doing now, and it seems to work very well. So her plants now, they may be a little bit slow to start off, but they will catch up, and they will be very, very healthy plants. So you dig a hole, you want it saucer shaped. You only want to dig it as deep as the plant is, and I'm talking after you've corrected for it. So you've taken off that top 1 or 2 inches of the potted plant, because that's where the true level, ground level of the plant should be. So you want it only as tall as the plant, and this will help you, if you put a board across it, that's going to help you decide how to do that. And 2 to 3 times as wide as the root ball. So you correct for the root problems. You remove the tags and stakes. We already did that. We've removed all the damaged branches, and we've got a saucer-shaped hole. And lift the root ball. And the other thing you should do, if you've taken all of the roots off like that, or all of the soil off, you're going to want to mound some soil. Pack some soil down after you've taken it out. Pack some soil down into a little mound there. Push it down firmly. Don't step on it with your foot. Push it down firmly, and place the plant on top of that, so that it doesn't, when you water it, it doesn't sink down into the ground a little bit more. You want it to have a nice firm foundation. This is especially important with bare root plants. So you firmly mound up this soil there to prevent the settling. Make sure when you'll have that that stick across there, that little piece of wood across there, so you'll know where the ground level should be, and you should be able to see that root flare at that level, just above that level. And you want to spread those roots out evenly spaced around the tree so that they're headed outward, not downward. Straighten the tree, have somebody else hold it. And then you're going to start backfilling with the soil. And you do not put any fertilizer in. You do not put any amendments in. You don't put any peat moss. You don't put any manure. You don't put anything in there. They've found that if you fertilize a plant when you plant it, it makes it harder for the roots to establish in the new soil. And if you amend it, you put in all this great stuff, this manure and the peat moss and everything else, that you have basically made a nice big pot for your plant, and those roots aren't going to want to go out beyond what you put in there, because that stuff's good. It doesn't want to go out into your native soil. So make sure that the only thing that goes back into that hole is the tree and the soil and water. And as you're putting the soil back in, you'll place it in and you kind of pat it down and then mud it in. Pour water in there. Just pour water in there. You've already done the perk test. You know that it's going to drain. Then put in some more soil, pat it down, add some more water. What you're doing is removing all the excess air pockets so that the tree will be well settled in there. And again, with bare root plants, you've got to keep the moist roots until they're planted. You want to dig a hole a little bit bigger kind of the same saucer-sized thing with a mound at the bottom. With those little bitty fruit trees, you kind of have to make a pyramid so that you can spread the roots over it. And then you're going to backfill with soil the same way. The top roots here should have about 2 inches of soil, and you want to make sure that you can see the root flare. And if it's a grafted tree, you want to make sure that the graft part of the tree is 4 to 6 inches, 3 to 4 inches above the soil level. And then you want to mulch it. I didn't say that about the other one, but you do want to mulch. You want to put no more than 4 inches, 2 to 4 inches of mulch over the area around the tree. You keep it about 2 to 3 inches away from the trunk of the tree to prevent, making a home for voles and other critters that might want to damage your trunk. Young trees need to be protected from sun scald. I'll show you some more pictures here. One of them just came in not too long ago. This is what it looks like. We get a lot of calls for people saying, there's something wrong with my tree. It's split and it's weeping, and I don't know what I did. Is it dying? Does it have a disease? It can get a disease when it has damage like this, but this is on the south side of that tree and southwest side, and the sun was too hot. It's the temperature fluctuations that cause that. What happens is it warms up during the day, and it just can't handle the temperature extremes. And the tree, I thought I had pictures here. The position of the tree graft, you want to make sure that bump where the tree graft is facing north, because that's the most vulnerable point. Young trees especially, and fruit trees, are very, very prone to this. One thing you can do is whitewash the trunk of the tree with a 50-50 solution of interior white paint and water. It's a whitewash. And then you paint the trunk about 4 or 5 feet up, and that helps to reflect some of that heat, and it really makes a big difference. This is the tree that came in not too long ago. This is an apricot tree, and apricots don't do well here to begin with, so she's going to have trouble with it. But this happened from sometime when she checked it in January. It was fine, and this is what it looks like now. At least that's what she's telling us. And again, this is a grafted tree. This is the graft union. You can see the trunk flare here. But what you want to do is make sure that is not facing south or west. When you put that in the ground, make sure that that's planting north. It's facing north, rather. And that's what it would look like. People like to stake trees. It's not always necessary. It might be if you've got a very small, like that plant that we chopped all the roots off and had it in water and then put it in the ground. That might not be firm enough at this point to be able to stand on its own. If you are going to stake a tree, stake it low on the ground. It's not good for trees to be staked because it's kind of like when you break your arm and your arm's in a cast. By the time you get that arm out of the cast, the break might be fixed, but your arm is withered and the muscles are weak. The same thing happens to the tree. That tree has to learn how to stand on its own, and it needs the wind to help it to do that. And if it's staked up too high, it just won't get strong. So you want to get it, you only want it up about, like the lower half of the tree at the most. Lower to the ground, the better. And you want something very flexible, like nylon hose. Nylon stockings are really good. And remove it as soon as it feels fairly secure, kind of rock it a little bit. If it feels secure, then take it off, but don't leave it on any longer than a year. Maintenance, this is where people in the Northwest really are missing the boat. I think we're so used to never having to water things because it rains so much here. And from what I understand, up until about 10 years ago, we had water in the summer, and we don't now. And our trees need water too. The first 3 years here, you've got to water. And you don't want to just dump water on. You want to make sure that you are getting it in slow so that it's sinking down. And there's a fallacy about tree roots. We've always been taught that what's above the ground is reflected below the ground in the root system, but that's not actually the case. The roots are, for the most part, the ones that soak up water and nutrients are in the top 12 inches of soil. That's all. And they spread out laterally, far beyond the drip line. So they need water, and when you're watering it, you just don't want to water around it, and you don't want to water on the trunk, because that's not a good place to water. You don't want that part to get wet. You want all these nutrient roots to get soaked. You're probably going to, depending on the weather, you're probably going to water your new plants, your new trees, probably once a week. You can space it out if it's cloudy and cool. You can you may, on really, really hot times, you may have to help it out and water it more. Check your soil at 6 inches. And if it's dry at 6 inches, if it's dry, 6 inches, it's, still dry, water it. So it'd be about 1.5 gallons of water per diameter of tree trunk. That's a pretty good rule of thumb. And one of the ways that you can help preserve the soil moisture is to mulch all the way out to the drip line and past. Some people plant their trees in their lawn and wonder why the trees aren't doing well, or the grass isn't doing well. And they're competing for soil moisture is what it is. And I personally think trees look lovely with mulch around them. And just make sure that you keep the mulch away, about 2-3 inches away on all sides of the tree. So this is what we talked about. We're going to be looking at it a little bit different. We had some examples of poor selection, and we looked at bad root systems. We saw some really poor planting sites, and we're not going to make those mistakes. And we saw tree roots were pot bound, and we saw the girdling roots. We saw people, well, I don't know, we didn't see a planting hole that was too small, but we've talked about planting holes that are too deep. If they're not mulched, or they're volcano mulched, where some of the landscapers used to love to pile it up around the base of the tree so it looked like a volcano, and trees were dying. Whether or not to stake, how to stake properly and when to take it off, how to water your plant. During the summer, I want to mention this too. People here aren't watering their plants during the summer because they didn't think they needed to. Arborvitae especially, they've got pretty shallow roots. You can overwater them and it'll kill them, but you've got to water them during the summertime because they get cumulative, all trees get cumulative drought damage, and we are seeing a lot of that from our summers. 4 or 5 summers in a row, they're not getting enough water, and they just don't do well. And you've got to monitor the plants, not just for, the planting, the roots, the water. If they have a disease, a fungus or an infection or bacterial infection or an infestation of insects, go out and check your stuff. If you catch it early enough, chances are you'll be able to save the tree. I have some amazing places for you to go to look for things. You can go and look for ground cover. Some of this PNW plants, you can go in there and look for ground covers. You can go in there and look just for shade plants. It's a really great thing because most of us just don't really have any idea. We're kind of at the mercy of the nurseries around here. This will give you a place to start so that you can go out and look before you go. And these are all going to be on the website right after we're done here. And I'm just paged through these. So, are there any questions?